Hey guys, today let's talk about an unsolved murder case that happened in Singapore in the 1970s. It was said to be one of the most brutal murders in Singapore history. Let's find out why. So the date was January 6, 1979, and the location was the one-bedroom flat belonging to a family of 6. They had 3 sons and 1 daughter. The eldest son was 10 years old and the youngest daughter was 5. So a typical day in this family would have their parents wake up earlier than their kids to bring other kids to school because they were mini bus drivers. As per usual, the parents would call back home at about 7 AM to wake their kids up for school. But what was different on this day was that not one of their kids picked up their calls. By 9 AM, the parents got really worried and got one of their neighbors to go check on them. When the neighbor went over and knocked on the front door, there was no response. Perhaps the kids had already gone to school. Well, if only that was the case. By 10 AM, Mrs. Tan had returned back home. When she entered the flat, she noticed something was wrong. The kids' school bags were right where she left them in the morning, and as she entered the bathroom, she saw the dead bodies of her kids piled up on top of one another. The eldest son's right arm was almost severed off, and the killer had chosen to only disfigure the daughter's face. The murder weapons were established to be a missing kitchen chopper and a knife. Both were not found and recovered. It was a sight so gruesome and brutal that reporters that were there at the crime scene that afternoon were either vomiting or crying their eyes out. It was a day no one could ever be prepared for. The police believed the motive behind the killings was revenge against the parents, even though the parents said that they had not offended anyone at all. The police also believed that the parents might have been involved in some illegal gambling group to which the killer was a part of, and the killer thought that they had cheated off him his prize money of $40,000. However, there was no evidence to say that this theory could stand, but what was known for sure was that the killer had planned for this murder. The killer knew that the parents would be leaving the house at 6:30 AM to drive other children to school that morning, leaving their kids behind alone. And the killer also knew that Mrs. Tan had recently undergone a sterilization procedure, which meant she could no longer bear any children. In some twisted way, the killer wanted to inflict upon them the greatest degree of pain and suffering for his or her own pleasure. The police also believed that the killer took the kids one at a time who were still asleep to the bathroom to kill them off, and that could explain why none of the neighbors heard any cries coming from the flat. In total, the police had interviewed over 100 witnesses yet came no closer to shedding any light on this case. According to one witness, he said that he saw the youngest daughter struggling with a man, and he quickly dismissed it, thinking that it was just someone hitting his own child. And according to another witness, a grandmother who would usually sit outside her flat to watch the Tan kids play apparently did not witness what had happened because she said she was washing her hair that morning. And according to a taxi driver, he said that he picked up a male passenger in his early 20s at about 8 AM near the location of the crime scene. He also noticed blood stains on the body as well as a knife in his pocket. He was also breathing heavily, leaning on the taxi door. Mr. Tan later matched the description of this young man to a neighbor of his who would usually come to his house to use the phone. For whatever reasons, no one knows. And later on in the police lineup, the taxi driver managed to identify this young man. That was not enough to arrest this young man, and later he was released due to the lack of evidence connecting him to the murders. The man eventually moved out with his sister to another area. And that was the end of the case, or so we thought. 2 weeks later, the Tan family received a Chinese New Year greeting card, and on the card written in calligraphy were these words in Chinese: "Now you can have no more offsprings, ha ha ha." And this was signed off as the murderer. Whether this was a hoax or not, it was definitely written by a very sick person. And in 1981, Mrs. Tan had undergone a reversal operation, which meant she could now bear children, and in a few years' time, a baby boy was welcomed into the family. But what was surprising was that the Tan family was still living in the same flat where the 4 murders happened. Well, that's the end of the case facts, so let's now talk about this case from a legal perspective. How do you actually convict someone of murder in this case? From a legal standpoint, one has to prove two elements. The first element is the physical act of killing, and the second element is the accompanying intention to kill. Well, I don't see that it's gonna be a problem to prove in court, seeing how the killing took place. But what I do want to talk about is the defense of diminished responsibility. This is a very common defense that accused persons would raise in court to avoid the death penalty. What the killer is essentially saying is that at the time of the murder, the killer was suffering from some abnormality of mind, so much so that he could not form any rational judgment whether an act is right or wrong, or that he was not in control of his own physical acts due to the mental impairment. And what must be proven to succeed in this defense is that the accused person must prove that at the time of the murder, the abnormality of mind had kicked in. It is not enough to say that he was suffering from a very general sense of mental impairment, because it is very much possible for one to be normal at one moment in time and at another he's not. And of course, the defense must be evaluated in light of medical evidence as well as the objective facts of the case. And in this case, I would argue that the murderer did not suffer from any abnormality of mind when he committed the murder, because from the facts, it is clear that he had meticulously planned for this day to happen. And if he's caught, it is almost certain that he would face the mandatory death sentence. Of course, the reality of this case is that there were no conclusive evidence connecting any person or persons to the murder of the 4 children. Well, that's the end of the video. Thanks for watching. Please do share your thoughts and subscribe to this channel for more content. Bye now. Hey guys, today let's talk about an unsolved murder. And in 1981, Mrs. Tan had undergone